A new crisis is unfolding in the Middle East. US President Donald Trump is threatening to bomb Iran, and Russia has just issued a dire warning in response. Yes, Russia. Trump's bombing threat has just created a global crisis that threatens to deepen the alliance between two of the US's most powerful enemies. And if the US isn't careful, we may be seeing the route toward Iran gaining access to nuclear weapons unfold before our eyes. The current tensions trace back to a March 30th interview, where Trump's statements coincided with ongoing US airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. This Iranian-backed militant group has disrupted Red Sea shipping since the Gaza conflict began. The Houthis have launched dozens of missile, drone and direct seaborne assaults against commercial vessels in the Red Sea, hijacking at least 3, sinking 2 others, and killing 4 crew members. The US, under Trump, has responded with an overwhelming bombing campaign against Houthi locations in Yemen that have killed at least 61 people since they started on March 15. So, Trump's interview came at a time when tensions were already high between the US and Iran, and what he said only elevated those tensions. When asked about whether US and Iranian officials were talking, Trump refused to elaborate on the issue much further. We do know that the US president has sent a letter to Iran demanding direct negotiations to discuss the country's burgeoning nuclear program. The US doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, which would only reinforce the country's support of groups like the Houthis, while making Iran a bigger threat in the Middle East. Iran, on the other hand, believes it needs nukes to project more regional power and to defend itself against countries like the US. Trump wants to make a deal, but if that doesn't happen, if they don't make a deal, there will be bombing, Trump told NBC News in a phone interview. It'll be bombing the likes of which they've never seen before. There's a chance that if they don't make a deal, I'll do secondary tariffs on them like I did 4 years ago. Trump's twofold threat has caught the attention of multiple nations. The secondary tariffs would be the more reserved of the two options. They would involve the US applying tariffs not on Iran directly, but on any country that does business with Iran. Those countries would have to pay tariffs, likely in the 25 to 50% region, on any goods they export to the US if they buy oil from Iran. Far more worrying is the threat of bombing, and to many it seems like a threat Trump may just carry out. He's already bombing the Houthis in Yemen, with the US also recently announcing that the USS Carl Vinson is en route to the Middle East to join the USS Harry S. Truman in that bombing campaign. The US has also sent at least 7 of its B-2A Spirit stealth bombers to its base on the island of Diego Garcia, which is in the range of Iran. It appears that Trump is serious about his bombing threat. He's positioning powerful US assets in key locations, which will allow the country to pepper Iran within days of Trump giving the order. And Iran either comes to the table, or the US responds with what can only be an act of direct war. That war may be coming sooner than you might think. Iran's response to Trump's letter came from its president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who said, "We don't avoid talks. It's the breach of promises that has caused issues for us so far." In other words, Iran isn't going to deal with the US directly. It doesn't trust America to follow through on its promises, though they have signaled an openness to indirect negotiations rather than face-to-face talks with Trump. And Trump's threats also brought an unexpected participant into the game: Russia. 2 days after Trump issued his bombing warning, Russia warned that any such attacks would have catastrophic consequences. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, outlined his country's response. Threats are indeed being heard. Ultimatums are also being heard, Ryabkov told the International Affairs Journal. We consider such methods inappropriate. We condemn them. We consider them a way for the US to impose its own will on the Iranian side. That seems rich coming from a representative of a nation that's made both veiled and unveiled nuclear threats to several countries, including Ukraine, Sweden and the UK, over the last few years. The criticism also represents a turnaround in Russia's approach to the US, according to the Times of Israel. Russia has, for the most part, refrained from sharp criticism of Trump, with whom Russian President Vladimir Putin has moved quickly to repair relations in a rapprochement viewed with concern by Ukraine and its European allies, the outlet says. Directly opposing the US and its bombing threats shows us that Russia is willing to choose a side in the emerging Middle East conflict, and it's not with the US. The Kremlin has offered to mediate discussions between the US and Iran, but that might not mean much to Trump. He wants to speak to Iran directly, with no intermediaries, whereas Iran won't have anything to do with discussions directly with the US. A powder keg is forming, and now Russia is getting involved in the fight between the US and Iran. But why exactly does Russia care? After all, it has its hands full with the Ukraine war right now. That war, which has raged for more than 3 years, has already cost Russia over 918,000 of its soldiers and has left the country's military massively depleted. Russia getting involved in the Iran issue, as it seems to be implying it will with its statement about catastrophic consequences, would surely stretch the country's military too thin. However, it's the Ukraine war that reveals the reason why Russia cares. That war has deepened the ties between Iran and Russia to the point where the two countries are closer than ever. Since Putin launched his February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Iran has been among Russia's top supporters. It's certainly cooperating with Russia on a military level previously unseen. That's according to the Stimson Center, which reports that Iran provided Russia with around 400 surface-to-surface ballistic missiles between February 2022 and March 2024. Most of those missiles come from Iran's Fateh family of munitions, which have ranges between 186 and 434 miles. That type of range enables Russia to conduct the constant missile bombardment it's conducted against Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure over the last few years. Those missile transfers marked a turnaround in Iran's cooperation with Russia. The two countries have long been allies, but Iran previously has been hesitant to transfer ballistic missiles to Russia, fearing blowback not only from the US but also European countries. Those fears seem to have dissipated, perhaps meaning that Iran views Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a changing of the guard in Europe. If Russia is successful, which is Iran's gamble, then Iran will have less to fear from Europe and the US because both could end up tied into a conflict with Russia. So, Iran sends missiles, now in the hope that the spotlight so often shined upon it will ease up. There's also the question of quid pro quo in play, says the Stimson Center. Russia needs missiles to maintain its assaults against Ukraine. It's burning through its own supplies, allowing Iran to position itself as one of Russia's key suppliers. Eventually, that will lead to Iran being in a position to call in some favors. Favors like having Russia stand up to the US when Trump threatens to bomb Iran into oblivion. Perhaps that's why Iran's military cooperation with Russia doesn't end in supplying missiles. It's also sending thousands of its Shahed drones to Russia, which are also taking part in Putin's aerial assaults against his nemesis. Reuters says that Russia had launched at least 8,060 of these drones against Ukraine by September 2024, and it's likely sent more since. Russia is also producing its own versions of the drones. Bulgarian military said that Putin ordered his defense industry to build 10,000 of Iran's Shaheds 136s in 2024 alone, suggesting that Iran has given Russia the specifications and tools to manufacture its drones. More aid comes from Iran in the form of munitions and artillery shells. In March 2024, CNN claimed that Russia had imported at least 300,000 artillery shells from Iran up to that point. Again, the numbers are likely much higher now, and it all points to a deep level of military cooperation. Iran helps Russia to pelt Ukraine with explosive weaponry, and now Iran can call on Russia to stand between it and the US. But ties between Iran and Russia extend beyond the militaristic. They're economic too, as both countries are members of BRICS. In 2023, the BRICS bloc, which is a collective of nations that work together on economic policy, welcomed 6 developing nations into its fold. Previously, BRICS comprised of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The 2023 invitation was extended to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, and most important, Iran. With those invitations, BRICS would account for 46% of the global population and around 37% of the world's gross domestic product, according to the Stimson Center. Iran's invitation to the group was controversial. While some of the BRICS members, notably India and Brazil, try to maintain strong ties to the West, the likes of Russia and China are more opposed to Western influence. Iran certainly falls into the opposition category. As China Global South Project researcher Cobus van Standen put it, Iran obviously is a complicated choice. I can imagine that some of the other members worry that it might increase geopolitical tensions with Western powers. That was certainly the implication gathered from former Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, who said at the time that Iran's membership in the bloc is opposition to American unilateralism. What does any of this have to do with Russia's dire warning? It shows us that Russia and Iran have deepened their economic ties just as much as they have their militaristic ones over the last few years. Russia relies on Iran for weapons, but it also needs Iran as a trading partner at a time when its economy is struggling under the weight of Putin's Ukraine war and the sanctions applied to Russia by the West in response. If any evidence of that was needed, the Tehran Times reported in January 2025 that trade between Iran and Russia reached $1.9 billion between March and December 2024. That represented a 14% increase over the same period in 2023 and will likely see trade deepen between the two countries in the coming years. The US bombing Iran would put that growing trade relationship under threat. Russia can't allow that. Not only would it lose access to missiles, drones and artillery that it's using in the Ukraine war, but it will potentially lose a vital source of income as Iran is forced to focus its efforts on combating the US. There's also the fact that Russia wants to use Iran to maintain its influence in the Middle East. In late November 2024, rebel forces in Syria launched a large-scale attack against the country's president, Bashar al-Assad, and his forces. That was a problem for Russia. It had relied on its close relationship with Assad to indirectly project power in the Middle East. But in little over a week, the Syrian rebels had taken control of the Syrian cities of Hama and Dara. By December 8, Syria's capital of Damascus had fallen, and with it fell Assad's regime. And with the loss of Assad, Russia found itself struggling to influence Middle Eastern politics as directly as it had in the past. Russia's deepening ties with Iran is a solution to that problem. Beyond all of the increasing trade and flow of weapons between the two countries, they've also put their partnership on paper. In January 2025, Iran and Russia signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty that solidified their relationship. Putin issued a statement in the wake of signing that document. We are now united in not resting on our laurels and taking Russian-Iran relations to a qualitatively new level. This is the meaning of the signed Interstate Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. It sets ambitious tasks and benchmarks for deepening bilateral cooperation in the long term in politics and security, trade, investment, and humanitarian areas. In other words, Russia and Iran are now working toward common interests, and keeping the US out of Middle Eastern politics is one of those interests. The dire consequences Russia warns of are designed to protect their relationship, keeping the flow of weapons from Iran into Russia secure while allowing Putin to maintain some level of influence over the Middle East. Of course, Russia isn't the only country threatening the US over Trump's threats. Iran itself has been far from silent. In fact, it's implied that Trump's efforts to force nuclear negotiations could result in Iran's nuclear program accelerating to the point where the US can no longer stop it. On April 1st, France 24 reported Iran's response to Trump's bombing threats. The country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, says that Iran is prepared to hit back if the US starts dropping bombs. Worse yet for the US, those strikes won't come from missiles and other conventional weapons, as the US would likely assume, but instead from something much more powerful. We're not moving towards nuclear weapons, but if you do something wrong in the Iranian nuclear issue, you will force Iran to move towards that because it has to defend itself. Iran does not want to do this, but it will have no choice. Iran's foreign ministry also accused the US of hypocrisy after Trump made his threats. Senior commander of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, General Amirali Hajizadeh, said, "The Americans have at least 10 bases in the region around Iran, and they have 50,000 troops. Someone who's in a glass room shouldn't throw stones at anyone." There's a lot to unpack from these comments. For one, Iran is accusing the US of being the aggressor in this emerging Middle East situation. Technically, it's correct, as Iran hasn't launched any direct attacks against the United States to prompt Trump's bombing threats. However, that's where proxies like the Houthis come into play, as the US will argue that Iran started the whole issue by funding and training the Houthis, who then went on to unleash their Red Sea campaign. Iran may not be the direct aggressor, but it's far from coincidental that it happens to benefit from aggression conducted by the groups that have ties to the country. Far more worrying for the US are Iran's claims that it will be forced to build a nuclear weapon if the US keeps pushing for negotiations. We see some contradictions in these claims, as Iran says it has no interest in building a nuke, yet it also seems to claim that it could if it wanted to. Nuclear weapons don't grow on trees, and developing the ability to make them requires years of research and effort, along with no small supply of very expensive equipment. If Iran says it can build a nuke, that means it's been working toward making one, which contradicts the claims that it isn't interested in having the weapons. It's a tangled little web of counter threats, but Iran's response begs the question: could Iran actually launch a nuclear weapon against the US? Right now, no. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, there isn't any public evidence that Iran has decided to build a nuclear weapon. That means Iran doesn't have a nuke right now. However, the journal is quick to point out that Iran has evolved into what it calls a de facto nuclear threshold state. It's on the verge of building a nuclear bomb, and it has the equipment to do so and is enriching uranium for that purpose. So, Iran may not have a nuke yet, but it could make one very quickly if it wanted. How quickly? A lot of that depends on its uranium enrichment work and the availability of the right centrifuges. Iran Watch says that it would take Iran just 2 weeks to enrich enough uranium to 60% to build between 5 and 8 weapons. Those nukes wouldn't be perfect, as modern nuclear weapons tend to use uranium enriched to 90%. Still, 60% enrichment is enough to build a basic nuke that Iran could launch against the US. On the centrifuge front, Iran Watch says that Iran will need either 3,000 IR-2 centrifuges or the same number of IR-6 centrifuges for uranium enrichment. With the former, it could take Iran just 4 months to build a nuke, with 5 warheads requiring 1 year and 8 months of work. If Iran has enough IR-6 centrifuges, those times are cut to 2.5 months and 12 months respectively. This all means that the US doesn't so much have to worry about an immediate Iranian nuclear threat as it does pushing Iran into accelerating its current nuclear program. But don't forget that Russia has also involved itself in the situation. Might Russia decide to arm Iran with nukes to dissuade the US bombing strikes? It's a possibility. Russia certainly has enough nuclear warheads to spare. According to the Arms Control Association, Russia maintains 5,580 nuclear weapons, with over 4,300 of them being in its military stockpile. That means the weapons aren't already strategically deployed, giving Russia the option to move them around and do whatever it sees fit with them. As for whether those weapons might ever make their way into Iran, the possibility is less unlikely than you may think. That's according to the European Leadership Network, which asked a nuclear question in an April 2024 article. It noted that the Gaza and Ukraine wars offered Iran a chance to cross the nuclear threshold. Why? Because Russia no longer sees Iran as a threat, given that both of those wars have deepened the ties between the two countries. Ultimately, Russia could see arming Iran with nukes as a means of controlling the country, claims the network. A nuclear-armed Iran would be economically and politically isolated. This would enable Russia to have more control over Iran, especially its economic resources such as oil and gas. So Putin may be playing a long-term game here. Outwardly, he's acting as though he wants to mediate between Iran and the US, but privately, he may view the escalation of Middle East tensions as an opportunity. Trump's bombing threats have opened the door for Russia to support Iran directly. If that support extends to Russia providing Iran with nukes, Putin will have more than paid back any debt owed for Iran's support in the Ukraine war, as well as creating a new threat for the US. He'll also isolate Iran, making it more dependent on Russia, to give him more influence in the Middle East. One thing's for certain, Russia and Iran's responses to the US threat of a bombing campaign aren't what Trump wanted. It seems like Iran is only moving further away from negotiations, and the dire consequences of which Russia warns may extend far beyond any thought imaginable only a few short months ago. But what do you think about the situation in the Middle East right now? Was Trump right to threaten to bomb Iran? Would Russia go so far as to equip Iran with nukes or help it develop its own? And what happens if Iran does get its hands on nuclear weapons? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for commentary on all of the developments in the Middle East crisis. We're an independent source for accurate, up-to-date news about military conflicts around the globe and greatly appreciate your support.